The casket was empty, but Commander Veth'ra didn't know that. I watched her from the observation deck 300 meters above the memorial grounds, my biosignature masked by Corvani stealth tech that even our own sensors couldn't penetrate. Below, the Stellar Alliance had gathered their finest admirals in dress uniforms, politicians dabbing at dry eyes, soldiers who'd served under me standing in rigid formation. And at the center of it all, a 7-foot Velorian warrior, with scales the color of deep ocean, her forearms clasped behind her back in the formal mourning stance of her people. She wasn't crying. Not yet. "You should not watch this," Lieutenant Kessin said from behind me, her voice barely above a whisper. "It will only cause pain. I need to see. I needed to know if it had been worth it." 18 months of carefully constructed lies. A fabricated shuttle explosion, genetic material scattered across a debris field. All to convince the Hegemony that Captain Marcus Webb was no longer a threat. That hunting me would be a waste of resources. The officiator began speaking. I couldn't hear the words from here, but I'd read the script. Decorated veteran of the Proxima campaign. Hero of the siege of Kepler 442. A man who gave everything for humanity and its allies. Veth'ra's scales rippled, a subtle shift in coloration that most humans wouldn't notice. I noticed. After 3 years serving as her human liaison, I'd learned to read her like a book. That particular shade of blue-gray meant she was fighting something. Suppressing something. "The Admiral's approaching her," Kessin observed. Admiral Chen placed a hand on Veth'ra's shoulder. A gesture of comfort between species. I watched Veth'ra's massive frame stiffen, watched her upper arms tighten while her lower ones trembled slightly. Then she spoke. I saw her mouth move, saw Chen step back, saw the ripple of reaction spread through the crowd. "What did she say?" I demanded. Kessin adjusted the audio amplifier. She said, "He was not just my human. He was my compass, and now I am lost." The words hit me like a plasma round to the chest. Velorians didn't form attachments easily. Their warrior culture valued independence, self-reliance, the ability to stand alone against any enemy. When Command had first assigned me as her cultural liaison, a polite term for the human she was supposed to protect in exchange for Alliance military support, she'd made her displeasure abundantly clear. "I do not need a burden," she'd said during our first meeting, her golden eyes cold as she looked down at my comparatively fragile human form. "I need warriors." "I'm not here to be protected," I'd replied. "I'm here to make sure you understand what you're protecting." She'd laughed at that. A harsh, dismissive sound that had echoed through the briefing room. 3 years later, she was calling me her compass. "The ceremony is concluding," Kessin said. "The personal mourning period begins now." This was the part I dreaded. Velorian tradition dictated that those closest to the deceased be given private time with the memorial marker. One by one, soldiers and dignitaries filed past, touching the holographic display that showed my service record, my commendations, my face frozen in an official portrait I'd always hated. Then they were gone, and Veth'ra was alone. She stood before my empty casket for a long moment, perfectly still. I could see her scales shifting through a spectrum of colors I'd never witnessed before. Deep purples and blacks. Shades that indicated emotions I didn't have names for. Then she did something that made my heart stop. She knelt. Velorian warriors didn't kneel. Not for their commanders, not for their gods, not for anyone. It was considered the ultimate surrender of dignity, reserved only for moments of absolute submission. And she knelt before my memorial, all 4 arms spread wide in the gesture of complete vulnerability, and she began to keen. The sound didn't carry through the observation deck speakers properly. It was too layered, too complex for human audio equipment. But I remembered what it sounded like. I'd heard it once before, when we'd recovered the bodies of our siblings after the Battle of Arcturus Prime. It was the sound of a Velorian soul breaking. "Captain Webb," Kessin said, her voice strained. "I must inform you, the Hegemony intelligence network has been monitoring the ceremony. If Commander Veth'ra's reaction is noted, they may suspect the deception." I didn't respond. I couldn't look away. Veth'ra was speaking now, her voice raw and broken between the keening cries. I didn't need the audio amplifier to know what she was saying. I could read it in the way her body curved toward the empty casket, in the way her claws dug into the memorial ground's perfectly manicured grass. She was apologizing. For not being there. For not dying in my place. For every moment she'd pushed me away when she should have held me close. "This was supposed to protect her," I said, my voice cracking. She was the primary target. The Hegemony wanted to break the Alliance by killing her. Their best warrior, their symbol of Velorian human cooperation. I was just the leverage they would use to get to her. And now she believes you are dead. And now she's safe. But watching her cry, watching this woman who had faced down Hegemony dreadnoughts without flinching, who had carried me through a collapsing space station with half her body burned away, who had once told me that death was simply another battle to be fought. Watching her break apart over my empty grave, I wondered if safety was worth the price. "The Corvani Council expects your answer within the hour," Kessin said gently. "Will you accept permanent relocation to our territories?" I was supposed to disappear. New identity, new life, new everything. Leave behind the war, the alliance, and the woman who had become more than just my protector. Below, Veth'ra finally rose from her knees. Her scales had shifted to a color I'd never seen, a deep, hollow gray that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Color of death, I realized. The color Velorians turned when they had nothing left to live for. No, I said. Captain, tell your council I decline their generous offer. I turned away from the window, my jaw set. I have a funeral to interrupt. Getting back to Alliance territory undetected was supposed to be impossible. I did it in 3 days. The Corvani were not pleased with my decision, but they understood it. Their species had their own concepts of bonding, of connections that transcended practical concerns. Kessin had even helped me modify a small transport ship, disabling its tracking systems and providing me with documents that would pass cursory inspection at most checkpoints. You understand this may expose our involvement in your false death, she'd said as I boarded the ship. I understand. And you do this anyway. For one person. I'd paused at the airlock. When I was 17, my father died in a mining accident on Titan. I watched my mother receive the news. She didn't cry, not at first. She just stopped. For 3 days she didn't speak, didn't eat, didn't move from her chair by the window. I thought she was gone too, just in a different way. Kessin had tilted her head, her large eyes reflecting the ship's running lights. What changed? I held her hand. That's all. I just sat with her and held her hand, and eventually she came back. But those 3 days, I'll never forget the look in her eyes. Like she was already dead and just waiting for her body to catch up. I'd looked back toward the observation deck, toward the memorial grounds I could no longer see. Veth'ra had that look. And I won't let her wait for death alone. Now, 72 hours later, I was hiding in a maintenance corridor of Starbase Sentinel, the Alliance's primary military installation in the Kepler sector turret. My old home. My old life. The base was different. Quieter. I'd expected the usual bustle of military activity, but the corridors felt subdued, the conversations I overheard hushed and somber. First I thought it was residual mourning for my death, but I quickly realized it was something else. Veth'ra had requested leave. Extended leave. Her 16 years of continuous service without a single day off, the most dedicated warrior in the Velorian fleet had asked to step away. The rumors were already spreading. Commander Veth'ra was broken. Commander Veth'ra had lost her fire. Some whispered that she'd requested transfer to the Outer Rim, to the most dangerous postings where death was almost certain. I had to find her before it was too late. My first stop was our old quarters, the shared suite that Command had assigned us when they decided that liaison officers should live close to their assigned protectors. I'd complained about the arrangement initially, citing the need for privacy and personal space. Veth'ra had complained louder, declaring that having a human underfoot at all hours would drive her to violence. We'd both stopped complaining within a month. The door's security system still recognized my biometrics. Apparently no one had thought to revoke a dead man's access codes. The lights flickered on as I entered, and I stopped short. The suite looked like a memorial. Every surface was covered with items that had belonged to me or that we'd acquired together. My collection of physical books, which Veth'ra had always mocked as primitive and fragile. The holoimages from our missions carefully arranged in chronological order. My favorite coffee mug, sitting in its usual spot but clearly unused, with a small Velorian mourning token placed beside it. And on the wall, where the standard Alliance artwork should have been, someone had hung my old jacket. The one I'd been wearing when we first met. You kept it, I whispered to the empty room. You mocked me for weeks about how thin and inadequate human clothing was, and you kept it. A sound from the bedroom made me freeze. I hadn't checked the life signs monitor before entering. Stupid. 3 years of careful military training and grief had made me sloppy. I drew my sidearm and moved silently toward the doorway, years of combat reflexes taking over despite my racing heart. The door was partially open, and through the gap I could see the massive sleeping platform that Veth'ra had installed to accommodate her frame. She was there. But she wasn't sleeping. Veth'ra sat in the center of the platform, her legs folded beneath her in a meditation pose, her forearms wrapped around something she held against her chest. Her eyes were closed, her scales that horrible gray color I'd seen at the funeral. She was so still that for a terrible moment I thought she'd stopped breathing. Then I saw what she was holding. It was my dog tags. The official Alliance identification markers that were supposed to have been destroyed in the shuttle explosion. She must have had a copy made, must have requested one from Command as a keepsake. And she was clutching them like a lifeline, her massive clawed hands trembling with the effort of holding something so small so gently. I lowered my weapon. I couldn't do this. I couldn't just walk in and announce that I was alive, not when she looked like this. It would be too much, too sudden. After everything she'd been through, she deserved better than a shock. But as I began to back away, her eyes opened. Golden irises fixed on me with an intensity that made me forget how to breathe. Her scales rippled through a dozen colors in the span of a heartbeat. Gray to black, to red, to white, to a brilliant impossible blue I'd never seen before. No, she said, her voice a broken rasp. No, this is not real. I have seen him before. In dreams. In the moments between waking and sleeping. This is not real. Veth'ra, stop. She was on her feet in an instant, all 7 feet of Velorian warrior, her forearms spread in a defensive posture. But she wasn't moving toward me. She was backing away. You will not do this to me again. I will not reach for you and find empty air. I will not. It's me, I said, and I holstered my weapon. Slowly I raised my hands, palms out. It's really me. I'm alive. I'm here. You are dead. Her voice cracked on the word. I watched them scatter your atoms across the debris field. I held the report in my hands. I felt it when you were gone. You felt the bond break because they wanted you to feel it. The Corvani have technology that can simulate that kind of severance. It's temporary, but it was enough to fool the Hegemony sensors. She was shaking now, her entire massive frame trembling. If this is true, if you are alive and you allowed me to believe, I had to. I stepped closer, slowly, the way you'd approach a wounded animal. You were the target, Veth'ra. The Hegemony wasn't after me. They were after you. I was just the leverage they planned to use. Kill the human, break the Velorian, destroy the symbol of the Alliance. So you chose to break me yourself? The accusation hit harder than any weapon. I stopped moving. I chose to keep you alive, I said. Even if it meant you hated me. Even if it meant watching you mourn from a distance. I couldn't. My voice broke. I couldn't let them take you. Not when there was another way. For a long moment she just stared at me. The colors on her scales shifted and churned like a storm system viewed from orbit. I'd seen her face down enemy armadas with less visible emotion. Then she moved. Velorians are fast. I'd always known that intellectually, their reflexes made human reaction times look glacial by comparison. But I'd never truly experienced it until she crossed the room in a blur of motion and her forearms wrapped around me. The embrace was crushing. Literally. I felt my ribs protest, felt the air drive from my lungs. But I didn't pull away. I couldn't have if I'd wanted to. You stupid, stupid human. She breathed against my hair, her voice muffled. You reckless, idiotic, impossibly precious human. I'm sorry, I managed, my voice squeezed by her grip. Veth'ra, I'm so sorry, you should be. But her arms loosened slightly, and I felt moisture on the top of my head. Velorians could cry, I realized. I'd just never seen it before. 3 days. I have been sitting in this room for 3 days trying to remember how to exist without you. And you were alive. I watched you, I admitted, at the funeral. I saw you kneel. She went rigid. In Velorian culture, admitting that you'd witnessed someone's most vulnerable moment was tantamount to declaring ownership of their soul. I'd just confessed to the worst kind of intrusion. But I'd also just told her that I'd been unable to look away. That even in hiding, even in supposed safety, I couldn't abandon her entirely. Her grip on me shifted. 2 arms remained wrapped around my torso, but the other 2 came up to cup my face, tilting it so she could look directly into my eyes. Her golden irises were wet, rimmed with red, more raw emotion than I'd ever seen her display. You watched me break, she said. Yes, you saw me at my weakest. I saw you at your most true. Something changed in her expression. The anger didn't disappear, but it shifted, transformed into something more complex. You do not understand. Among my people, what I did at your memorial, what you witnessed, it binds us. Permanently. There is no cultural equivalent in human terms, but the closest translation would be... She hesitated and I watched her scales shift to a soft, uncertain purple. Would be what? Haunted. Would be that I have made myself yours. Completely. Without reservation or condition. Her claws traced gently along my jawline. And you witnessed it. Which means you accepted. I should have been frightened. 3 years ago, the idea of being owned by anyone, let alone a 7-foot alien warrior, would have sent me running. But 3 years of serving beside her, of learning her, of becoming her compass. Good, I said simply. Her scales flushed through a dozen colors I didn't have names for. Good, I didn't fake my death because command ordered me to, Veth'ra. I did it because the thought of them hurting you was more unbearable than the thought of never seeing you again. If that's not belonging to someone, I don't know what is. Her arms tightened around me again, but this time the embrace was gentle. Careful. The way someone holds something precious. The hegemony will not stop, she said quietly. When they learn you are alive, they will try again. Let them. You are not invincible, Marcus. It was the first time she'd ever used my first name. In 3 years of service I'd always been Captain Webb or Human or, occasionally, the small one. Never Marcus. Neither are you, I replied. But together we're harder to kill. She made a sound that might have been a laugh, might have been a sob. You came back. You actually came back. I watched you cry, Veth'ra. I watched you kneel before an empty casket and apologize for not dying in my place. Did you really think I could stay hidden after that? I thought. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. I thought you had finally realized how dangerous being near me truly is. I thought you had chosen survival over... Over whatever this is. I pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. I chose you. I will always choose you. The danger doesn't change that. It just means we need to be smarter about how we survive it. For a long moment we simply stood there, wrapped in each other, relearning the reality of the other's presence. The room was quiet except for our breathing. Then Veth'ra spoke, and her voice had regained some of its familiar steel. You realize that faking your death was a declaration of war against the Hegemony. They will not forgive the deception. I know. And that revealing yourself here puts the entire starbase at risk. I know that too. Her scales shifted to the color of determination, a deep, burning orange I'd seen before, just before she charged an enemy position. Then we should probably start planning our next move. If the Hegemony wants a war, we will give them one. I smiled, and for the first time in 3 days, it felt real. There's the warrior I know. There is the human I chose, she replied. And then, softer, there is the human who chose me back. We had 3 hours of peace before the Hegemony found us. In those 3 hours, Veth'ra and I had done what we always did best, plan. We'd mapped out potential Hegemony responses, identified weaknesses in the starbase's defense grid, and contacted the handful of Alliance officers we could trust absolutely. The list was shorter than I would have liked. We were in the middle of a strategic briefing with Colonel Vasquez, one of my oldest friends in the service, when the alarm started. Proximity alert, the base AI announced. Unknown vessels emerging from subspace. Count. 17. Configuration. Hegemony attack formation. Vasquez's face went pale. 17? They've never committed that many ships to a single target. They've never had this much at stake. I was already pulling up tactical displays. The Corvani deception cost them 6 months of intelligence work and made them look foolish. This isn't just retaliation, it's a message. Veth'ra's scales had shifted to battle-ready red. Then we should ensure our reply is equally clear. She turned to Vasquez. Colonel, I am resuming active command. Get me direct communication with Fleet Admiral Chen. Commander, you're technically still on leave. My leave ended the moment my human returned from the dead. She didn't even look at me when she said it, but I caught the slight warmth in her tone. Now, Colonel. We do not have time for bureaucratic concerns. Vasquez nodded and hurried to the communications array. 17 ships, I said, studying the tactical display. That's overkill for a single starbase, even one of Sentinel's size. They are not here for the starbase. Veth'ra moved to stand beside me, her 4 arms folding across her chest. They are here for us. For what we represent. She was right. A human and a Velorian bonded in a way that transcended species and culture. We were the living symbol of Alliance cooperation. Destroy us publicly, and you shattered the entire foundation of the human-Velorian partnership. We could evacuate, I said. Take a shuttle, draw them away from civilian targets. We could. Her golden eyes met mine. But that is what they expect. They want us running, isolated, vulnerable. What's the alternative? Her scales shifted to a color I'd never seen before, a brilliant, defiant gold that seemed to glow from within. We make them regret coming here. Admiral Chen's face appeared on the communications display, her expression grim. Commander Veth'ra. I've been informed of the situation and of Captain Webb's unexpected return. Admiral. Veth'ra's voice was formal, but I could hear the steel beneath it. The Hegemony force is attempting to make an example of this installation. I request permission to deny them that opportunity. You have 17 enemy vessels bearing down on us, Commander. What exactly do you propose? That I do what Velorians do best. She turned to look at me, and for a moment the warrior facade cracked. Marcus, I need you to trust me. I do. Then stay here. Coordinate the defense. I will handle the fleet. My blood ran cold. Handle them how? But she was already moving, striding toward the door with purpose in every step. I caught her lower arm, pulling her to a stop. Veth'ra, wait. Talk to me. She turned, and the look in her eyes was equal parts love and grief. The Velorian flagship, the Kethfor, is docked in Bay 7. It has been waiting for me to return to service. She paused. It's also equipped with the 1,000 Stars protocol. Felt the room tilt. That's a suicide run. 1,000 Stars takes out everything in a 10-kilometer radius, including the ship that activates it. Yes. No. I gripped her arm tighter. Absolutely not. I didn't fake my death and come back from hiding just to watch you actually die. Marcus, you said I was your compass. You said you were lost without me. I pulled myself closer to her, looking up into those golden eyes. If you do this, I'll be lost too. Forever. Is that what you want? Her scales flickered through a dozen emotions. I want you to live. I want the Alliance to survive. I don't care what you want for me. My voice cracked. I care about what you want for yourself. What does Veth'ra want? Not the commander, not the warrior. Veth'ra. For a long moment she was silent. The alarms continued to blare around us, and I could feel the deck shuddering as Sentinel's defense systems powered up. But in that moment it was just the two of us. I want to grow old with you, she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. I want to watch your hair turn gray and your face wrinkle. I want to argue with you about insignificant things and make up afterward. I want... Her voice broke. I want the impossible. I want a future, then fight for it. I reached up with my other hand, touching her face the way she touched mine earlier. With me, not for me, the fleet can be defeated without sacrifice. You know that. You've done it before. I forced a smile. You're the greatest warrior in the Velorian fleet. Start acting like it. Something shifted in her expression. The desperation began to fade, replaced by the sharp tactical mind I'd fallen in love with. The 1,000 stars is designed to be used as a last resort, she said slowly. But its targeting system could theoretically be modified. Narrowed. Keep talking. If we could isolate the Hegemony command vessel, force it to separate from the fleet, a targeted detonation might destroy it without taking the HFY with it. That's still incredibly risky. But survivable. Ma'am, to run. Her scales were shifting now, turning that determined orange color. It would require a distraction. Something to draw the fleet's attention while I maneuver into position. I grinned. I know just the thing. 40 minutes later, I was piloting a heavily modified shuttle directly into the heart of the Hegemony formation. This is Captain Marcus Webb of the Stellar Alliance. I broadcast on all frequencies. I understand you've been looking for me. I'm right here. Come and get me. The response was immediate. 3 Hegemony destroyers broke formation to pursue, their weapon systems locking onto my small, apparently defenseless ship. What they didn't know was that the Corvani modifications included stealth technology that would activate the moment I went dark. All I had to do was survive long enough to reach the designated coordinates. Shuttle to HFY, I subvocalized into my comm. Package is moving. 3 escorts as predicted. Veth'ra's voice came back, tight with controlled fear. Marcus, your shield capacity won't survive more than 4 direct hits. Then, I'd better not get hit 4 times. This is not amusing. It's a little amusing. I banked hard, feeling the shuttle's frame protest as plasma bolts scorched. Past my viewport. Position update, moving into range. 3 minutes to optimal targeting distance. 3 minutes. I could survive 3 minutes. The first hit came at the 2-minute 40-second mark. The shuttle shuddered violently, alarms screaming as the shields dropped to 30%. I juked and wove, but the Hegemony pilots were good, better than I'd anticipated. Marcus. Veth'ra's voice was sharp with panic. Still here. Just a scratch. Your shields, I see them. Focus on your target. Second hit. 15% shields. The shuttle's navigation system was starting to glitch, throwing up error messages faster than I could dismiss them. 1 minute to range, Veth'ra reported. Marcus, the 3rd destroyer is pulling ahead. It's attempting to cut off your escape route. I looked at my tactical display and saw she was right. The Hegemony captain had figured out my trajectory and was moving to intercept. In approximately 40 seconds, I would be caught between 3 enemy ships with nowhere to go. Unless I did something incredibly stupid. Veth'ra, on my mark, I need you to activate the 1,000 stars targeting sequence. You'll be in the blast radius. Not if I time it right. Took a deep breath. Do you trust me? A pause. Then with everything I am. Then trust me now. Mark in 10988. I killed my engines, letting the shuttle drift. The Hegemony ships, confused by the sudden loss of thrust, slowed their pursuit. Exactly as I'd hoped. 7. 6. 5. I activated the Corvani stealth system. The shuttle vanished from sensors, its signature dispersing into background radiation. To the Hegemony, it would look like I'd simply ceased to exist. 4. 3. 2. I slammed the engines into full reverse, rocketing backward through the space I'd just occupied. The destroyer that had been moving to intercept me shot past, now positioned directly between me and the command vessel. 1. Mark! HFY's weapon systems lit up like a star being born. The 1,000 Stars protocol, designed to create a sphere of absolute destruction, had been modified as Veth'ra suggested. Instead of expanding in all directions, the energy focused into a concentrated lance that punched through the destroyer and into the command vessel beyond it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then both ships detonated in a cascade of secondary explosions that lit up my viewport like a sunrise. Command vessel destroyed, Veth'ra reported, her voice triumphant. The fleet is in disarray. They're retreating. I watched as the remaining Hegemony ships broke formation, their coordination shattered with the loss of their command structure. Within minutes, they were in full retreat, vanishing into subspace with what remained of their invasion force. Marcus. Veth'ra's voice was softer now. Are you injured? I looked down at myself. My hands were shaking, and I was fairly certain I'd bitten through my lip at some point, but I was alive. I'm okay, I said. Coming home. Holman. The word felt different now. Not the empty suite, not the starbase, not even Earth. Home was wherever she was. Hurry, she said. And then, even softer, I am not accustomed to this feeling. This fear that does not fade even when the danger has passed. It's called love, I replied. Or so I've been told. It is deeply inconvenient. It is. I do not wish it to stop. I smiled, guiding my battered shuttle back toward Sentinel. Neither do I. The aftermath of the battle brought unexpected challenges. Word of our survival, and our victory, spread across the Alliance within hours. The story took on a life of its own. The human captain who had faked his death to protect his Velorian bondmate. The warrior commander who had grieved publicly and then fought to reclaim her future. The modified weapon that had turned the current tide against impossible odds. We became symbols. Again. But this time, it felt different. They want to interview us, Veth'ra said, scrolling through her messages with obvious distaste. 17 news organizations, 23 military historians. And she paused. The Velorian Council of Bonds. I looked up from my coffee. The what? She hesitated, her scales shifting to an embarrassed purple. They are the governing body that oversees bonded pairs. They have questions about our relationship. Questions like what? Whether our bond was formed according to proper protocols. Whether the human involved truly understands the nature of the commitment. Whether, she set down her datapad. Whether I should be reprimanded for binding myself to someone outside our species. I set down my coffee with more force than intended. Reprimanded? You're their greatest warrior. You just saved an Alliance starbase and drove off 17 enemy ships. That is precisely the concern. He finally met my eyes. A warrior of my status bonding with a non-Velorian is unprecedented. It raises questions about divided loyalties, about the dilution of Velorian cultural traditions, about whether you love me more than you love your duty. The word hung in the air between us. We danced around it since my return using words like bond and compass and belonging. But I just said it plainly, and I couldn't take it back. Veth'ra's scales shifted through a cascade of colors before settling on that soft, impossible gold. Yes, she said quietly. That is exactly the question. And what's the answer? She stood all 7 feet of her and moved to stand before me. Her forearms hung at her sides, but her posture wasn't defensive. It was open. Vulnerable. When I was young, she said, I was taught that love was a weakness. That it clouded judgment, compromised mission effectiveness, made warriors soft and careless. I believed this. I built my entire career on emotional distance. And then Command assigned me a human liaison who refused to be kept at arm's length. A ghost of a smile crossed her features. You argued with me. Challenged me. Made me explain my decisions instead of simply accepting them. You treated me like an equal, not a weapon. You were never just a weapon to me. I know. That was the problem. She reached out with one of her lower hands, the one that I'd noticed she used for intimate gestures rather than practical ones. First time you were injured in the field. You remember the Arcturus mission? I remembered. A Hegemony patrol had caught us off guard, and I'd taken shrapnel to the shoulder protecting Veth'ra's flank. A minor wound by combat standards, but it had bled profusely. You screamed, I said. I'd never heard you make a sound like that. I had never felt terror like that. Real terror, not for myself but for you. Her hand closed around mine. That was when I knew the teachings were wrong. Love is not a weakness. It is a reason to survive. A reason to fight harder, to be better, to refuse defeat. Veth'ra, the council will ask me if I love you more than my duty. And I will tell them the truth. My duty and my love are the same thing now. Protecting you, protecting what we've built, protecting the alliance that allows us to exist together. It is all one purpose. I stood, bringing us closer together. And if they don't accept that answer? Then they can find another warrior to win their battles. Her scales flashed a defiant crimson. I am done being what they want me to be. I am Veth'ra, bondmate of Marcus Webb, and I will not apologize for it. The declaration hung in the air between us, and I felt something fundamental shift. Not in her, in me. For 3 years I'd operated under the assumption that I was the junior partner in our relationship. She was the warrior. I was the liaison. She was the protector. I was the protected. Even my sacrifice had been framed that way, dying to save her because that was my role. But I'd been wrong. Our bond wasn't about hierarchy or protection or duty. It was about choice. She had chosen me, over and over, even when it cost her. And I had chosen her even when the choice seemed impossible. I love you, I said, because it was finally time to say it plainly. Not because you're a warrior or a symbol or the greatest soldier the Velorians have ever produced. I love you because you kept my jacket. Because you learned to make terrible human coffee even though it makes you sick. Because you pretend you don't like it when I read aloud to you, but your scales turn that soft purple color every time. Her scales, predictably, shifted to soft purple. That is, that's trumpy. Those are very small things. Love is made of small things. I reached up with my free hand touching her face. The big gestures matter too. The sacrifice, the fighting, the dramatic returns from the dead. But it's the small things that make it real. Human wisdom? Human experience? I smiled. My parents were married for 32 years before my father died. You know what my mother said she missed most? Not the big moments, the wedding, the promotions, the anniversaries. She missed the way he would hum while he made breakfast. The way he'd fall asleep reading and she'd have to take the book from his hands. The small things. Veth'ra was quiet for a long moment. Then she leaned down, touching her forehead to mine, a Velorian gesture of absolute trust. When you were dead, she whispered, I could not bear to sleep in our bed. It smelled like you. I would find myself reaching for you in the night and finding empty space, and the pain was, I do not have words for it. You don't need words. I need you to understand. Her voice was fierce now. The council may demand explanations. The alliance may require justifications. But you need to understand that if I lost you again, truly lost you, there would be nothing left of me worth saving. That's not true. Let me finish. Her grip on my hand tightened. You are not my weakness, Marcus. You are my reason. The answer to every question of purpose I've asked myself since I was old enough to hold a weapon. I fought because I was told to. I survived because it was expected. But I live. I truly live, because of you. Felt tears threatening, which would have been embarrassing if I'd cared about such things anymore. The feeling is mutual. Good. She straightened, and some of her usual commander's bearing returned. Because the council arrives in 3 hours and I intend to tell them exactly that. In considerably more formal Velorian, with appropriate ceremonial gestures. Should I be there, you are my bondmate. Your presence is required. A hint of humor crept into her voice. Also, I believe the sight of you standing beside me will make my argument more compelling than any words. Using me as a prop, using you as proof. She touched my face again, her claws gentle against my skin. They want to know if human Velorian bonds are possible. We will show them. 3 hours later, we stood in the formal receiving chamber that had been hastily converted for the council's visit. Veth'ra wore her ceremonial armor, all gleaming scales and traditional weapons. I wore my dress uniform, which felt inadequate by comparison, but was apparently an important symbol of Alliance legitimacy. The council consisted of 5 Velorians, each one ancient and imposing in their own way. They sat in a traditional judgment formation, their eyes fixed on Veth'ra with expressions that ranged from curious to openly hostile. The eldest, a massive warrior whose scales had faded to pale silver with age, spoke first. Commander Veth'ra, you have requested recognition of your bond with this human. I have. This is unprecedented. Our traditions do not account for cross-species bonding. With respect, Elder, our traditions also did not account for alliance with humans. Yet here we are, fighting alongside them, dying alongside them, building a future alongside them. The Elder's eyes shifted to me. And you, human. You understand what this bond entails. I understand that I belong to her, I said carefully, and that she belongs to me. Not as property, but as partners. As compass points for each other. One of the younger council members leaned forward. A compass can be discarded when no longer needed. Then you don't understand compasses. I met their gaze directly. A compass isn't useful because it tells you where to go. It's useful because it tells you where you are. Without it, you're lost. Veth'ra is my compass, and I am hers. We navigate by each other. The chamber was silent. I could feel Veth'ra's pride radiating from her scales, a deep blue color I'd come to recognize as approval. The Elder spoke again. Commander Veth'ra, 3 days ago, you knelt at this human's memorial and performed the HFY, the soul's surrender. This is the most sacred of our morning rituals. It cannot be undone. I am aware. You bound yourself to a human you believed to be dead. Now he stands before us alive. The Elder's eyes were unreadable. Do you regret your choice? Veth'ra turned to look at me, and in that moment her expression held nothing but certainty. I regret every moment I spent believing he was gone, she said. I regret the 3 days of agony. I regret that our bond was forged in grief rather than joy. She turned back to the council. But regret the bond itself? Never. I would make the same choice 1,000 times. Even knowing the cost. The limitations it places on your future, the complications it creates for your career, even knowing all of it. Her voice was steel and silk woven together. He is worth more than any career. More than any tradition. More than the approval of any council. The Elder was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, they rose from their seat. The HFY was never meant for cross-species bonds, they said. Our ancestors could not have imagined such a thing, but they created the ritual for a reason. To acknowledge that some connections transcend duty, transcend expectation, transcend even death. I felt Veth'ra tense beside me. What you have described, Commander, is precisely what the HFY was designed to honor. The soul's surrender is not about cultural purity or species compatibility. It is about recognizing when another being has become essential to your existence. The Elder gestured, and the other council members rose as well. We recognize your bond with this human. It is valid. It is sacred. And it is. They paused, and something that might have been a smile crossed their ancient features. It is perhaps exactly what our traditions needed. A reminder that the heart does not care about boundaries. Veth'ra's scales exploded into brilliant gold. I'd never seen her look so purely happy. Afterward, when the council had departed and the formal ceremonies were concluded, we stood alone in the chamber that had witnessed our recognition. I did not expect that outcome, Veth'ra admitted. Neither did I. I reached for her hand. But I'm not surprised. You were right about what you said, about duty and love being the same thing. I think the council recognized that, perhaps. She turned to face me fully. Or perhaps they simply recognized that separating us would be more trouble than it was worth. Also a valid interpretation. She laughed, a real laugh, warm and unguarded. It was a sound I'd heard perhaps 3 times in our entire relationship, and it made my heart ache with joy. So I said, what happens now? The hegemony is still out there. The war isn't over. We've just become even more visible targets. Now we do what we have always done. She pulled me closer, her forearms wrapping around me with practiced ease. We fight. We survive. We protect each other. Together? Together? She touched her forehead to mine again. Always together. Until the stars burn out. It wasn't a human wedding vow. It wasn't a Velorian bonding ceremony. It was something new, something that belonged only to us. A promise made in the aftermath of death and resurrection, of grief and reunion, of a love that had been tested and found unbreakable. I had faked my death to protect her. I had watched her cry at my funeral. And I had come back, because a future without her wasn't a future worth surviving. Now we had that future. Whatever it held, we would face it as we'd faced everything else, standing together, compass points for each other, navigating by the only stars that mattered. Each other,